Hi, we are NUM Support for SEND Educational Psychology Service. Welcome to the third part in our series, Promoting Positive Transitions, which is adapted from Hopful et al. 2007 5-part model, which focuses on supporting recovery in response to trauma and crises. The focus areas are increased sense of safety, sense of control and efficacy, connectedness, calmness, and finally hope. Even though change can feel uncertain and uncomfortable, the transition process can provide important opportunities for the shaping of an individual's identity and resilience. Today's session is going to focus on connectedness. The meaning that we are going to link to this term is the opportunities people have to connect with others in a way that is supportive to them. The image on the screen shows a mural I had spotted whilst cycling in central London. And what grabbed my attention was the hashtag symbol at the end of the building, which said hashtag connectivity matters. And I thought that was so true, particularly given the global pandemic that we're currently dealing with. Actually, it was a great reminder that connectivity is such an important thing and that relationships are fundamental to our emotional well-being. So first area that I want us to focus on in relation to connectedness is prioritizing relationships. This is a key aspect. As I highlighted earlier, relationships are fundamental to our emotional well-being. Within the context of school, teaching and learning doesn't happen in a vacuum. They happen between people, staff and pupils, with interactions and relationships forming a key part of that. It is important for the emotional well-being of both staff and pupils to feel connected with others and to importantly have a sense of belonging in school. Relationships at all levels should be focused on, including staff to staff, student to student, and staff to student. We all need to regulate and connect before we can learn. Before children and young people can learn or even reason, they need to feel regulated and feel connected. Negative social support can actually have an adverse effect. And so promoting relationships as an intervention is imperative, and it is the primary mechanism for supporting our recovery from adversity. So let's all remember to stay physically distant but emotionally close. We're now going to focus on targeted support for young people and how we can help to increase their connectedness, but also maintain that. Providing a nurturing environment will enable children and young people to develop their social and emotional skills, mental health, and their resilience. And so it is important to make time for talking about the trauma or the critical incident that has happened. It helps them to feel that their voices are being heard, but also valued. A little and often approach is most helpful. And perhaps having 5 minutes daily would actually be more effective than having half an hour at the end of a week. It will also be helpful to consider setting ground rules for groups and individual conversations so that everyone feels safe to be open and vulnerable. Given that students haven't been in school for a while, or prior to their return they hadn't been in school for a while, it's important to focus on ways to re-establish their connections with other peers, because they may actually have concerns over interactions and loss of friendships following this time apart. And as we know, play and fun are important to heal and move us on. We know that when we're feeling happy, it releases the happy hormones in our brain, which impacts our body, and those happy hormones are often referred to as endorphins. And so we want to increase as much endorphins within the minds of our children and young people so that they can actually move on and develop and engage with all the learning that is before them. It would also be helpful to provide specific peer-to-peer programs to help the students reach out to each other and facilitate connections. And that may be in the form of buddy and befriending schemes. Additionally, staff interactions with students is key, as I highlighted at the beginning. And it will be helpful to actually schedule in time to have regular check-ins with pupils about their hopes and worries, which can normalize their emotions and help them to manage their expectations. And it also helps the students to build new relationships, because there are many students that would have returned to school with a new teacher, and perhaps in some cases they have the same teacher. So again, it's about reconnecting or building new relationships with key adults. And there are some children that may benefit from being assigned to a particular member of staff who may be able to act as a mentor or a key adult. They can build a supportive relationship so that they can help them to work through any emotions that they may experience with regards to the transition of going back to school, or even transitions within the school day. One thing to really hold in mind and to emphasize within the context of the classroom is about having an environment of nurture. Research shows that when we feel nurtured and we're feeling emotionally safe, that's when we're best able to learn. And so it's about creating a nurturing environment within our classrooms and wider within the school organization. And this can be done by allowing the classroom to be a safe base, and also highlighting the importance of nurture for the development of well-being. So letting the children know that it's good for their emotional well-being to be considered, and enable them to make the link between, if they're feeling emotionally well, then they're better able to engage with learning and other aspects of schools. It's also important to hold in mind that language is a vital means of communication. So we have to be aware of the language that we're using to communicate with children or young people. And also, it's important to, if there are any behaviours that are of concern, rather than seeing them in isolation, it is important to see them as a communication, that they're communicating an emotional need that perhaps they may not have the vocabulary to articulate to the adults around them or to even peers. And actually, transitions are an important aspect of children's lives, and it's important that we help them to manage them, because that will be one of the consistent things that children and young people will experience as they grow, transitions. And so we need to help them to understand how they can respond to those transitions when they arise. In terms of the wider organisation, it will be important to consider how can an inclusive ethos be facilitated and encouraged. It will be important to create smaller communities within the larger school, particularly for secondary schools, which are much bigger than primary schools. And so it will be helpful to have check-ins and check-outs. For example, a coaching model might include students checking in each Monday in a small group with an adult that will support that process. And they may check in again on Wednesday and then check in again on Friday before going home for the weekend. And one thing that research shows is that beginnings and endings are really important. And if we can help children and young people to feel safe and feel that the school environment is predictable, this will inevitably help them to feel connected, to feel settled, and to learn. Staff members can also help model a sense of community to support students to develop and maintain attachments. For example, just using communal language such as our school, our project, we can, together. Those keywords can make such a difference to one's well-being and how connected or even the sense of belonging one might have within an environment. So it's important to be conscious of the language that we're using. And importantly, ensure that there is clear and regular communication between school and parents to create a feeling of connectedness. Because again, we have to hold in mind that parents are going to feel anxious about their children returning to school because there's a lot of unknowns. And so by having clear communication helps parents to have some sense of control because they're aware of what's going to happen now and what may happen next. And so just ensuring parents are held in mind is really key. Now we're going to focus on what support can be targeted for staff. We've given some consideration to targeted support for young people, which looked at how we can increase their connectedness and the link to learning and just feeling settled. But I always say that if we as teachers do not look after ourselves, then it can, in essence, impact on our capacity to hold others in mind and to engage with those that we're working with. And I'm reminded of an analogy that is often shared when you're on an aeroplane. It's the safety announcement, and they say if the airplane goes down, don't seek to put the mask on others, but actually put your safety mask on first, because once you are breathing and in a regulated state, you are then able to think clearly and to support others. So it's the same with our emotional well-being. If our emotional well-being as staff is topped up, then we are more than in a better position to be able to engage with our children and young people and to support them in the way that they need. So I think for staff, it is really important to build in opportunities during the day or the week for you all to check in with each other. The connectedness between staff and leaders will be important also to have a sense of belonging in school. So in addition to staff checking in with each other, it'll be important for leadership to check in as well. A space should be provided where staff can go if they need a break or feeling overwhelmed or someone to talk to. Again, there are moments where we feel overwhelmed, and it is important that we acknowledge that and do those things that help us to become regulated as opposed to ignoring those emotions. Because what can happen if we continue to ignore those emotions, they can actually resurface, but in more extreme ways later on down the line. So it's just being conscious of how you're feeling emotionally. And I know it can be difficult because in the school day you're busy engaging with things, but actually, having boundary time, or protected time, I should say, to just stop and reflect on how you are feeling. And if you are feeling overwhelmed, just being able to speak about that can help, because talking can often be cathartic. What has also been helpful for some schools is that they've created a well-being buddy scheme whereby staff are paired with another member of staff, and they share things about their well-being. So for example, they might share that I know that I'm not feeling my best emotionally when I'm not engaging with others, when I'm quiet. And actually, if there is somebody that can spot those signs when you're not feeling emotionally great, then that's the point at which that person can step in and say, I've noticed that you're not speaking as much, and I wonder whether you need a chat, or actually having just some time to regulate. So again, just having that check-in process with one another, that accountability with each other. The Anna Freud Centre offers some great resources to be able to further structure targeted support for staff. So I do encourage you to have a look at this website, which is at the end of this slide. Karen Treisman has done a lot of work around post-traumatic work. And one thing she's highlighted, which I think is so true, is that every interaction is an intervention. So actually the fact that there is a focus on connectedness, whether peer-to-peer, staff to staff, or student to staff, actually that is the intervention. And it's also to highlight that it's sometimes the little things that make a huge impact. And the interaction could be as small as actually giving somebody a smile. That could make somebody's day, or just help them to feel better if they're not in a great place, or actually to continue to promote that happy place that they're in. So do hold that in mind. Thank you for listening to our third part in our series about connectedness. We look forward to welcoming you at our next webinar Wednesday, which will focus on calmness.